Okay, terrific. Good afternoon. This is Senate Education. It is Thursday, February 18th, and we're going to get started. First thing on our calendar today, we're just going to punt a little bit until Ledge Council is available. I just wanted to return to the library working group just to see if anybody had any questions or concerns. Conversations in the corner office. We are kind of, and by the corner office for new senators, the Pro Tem's office is interested in seeing perhaps this being part of a larger bill. So perhaps part of a miscellaneous education bill. So what we'll do is we will hear from Mr. Anderson when he comes back from spending a little time in the House. So if it works for you, Jim, I thought we might move immediately to looking at the literacy bill before we hear from witnesses. And then we can hear from some witnesses. And again, we might be interrupted just momentarily to return to a discussion around libraries. Jim, does that work for you?
Oh, sure. Yep.
Okay, terrific. So with that, let's have Mr. Desmarais take us through the most recent draft of the bill having to do with literacy. Later on, toward the end of the day, we'll also be hearing, going back to COVID-19 education needs, and that's in response to the draft letter that we have going to Appropriations, hopefully tomorrow. We have somebody from the Department of Health, and we have Vermont Principals Association coming in to weigh in on our most recent draft. So with that, Jim, if you don't mind, senators, does
everybody have?
This is draft 3.2 of our committee bill on literacy.
Correct. Yep.
If someone does not have it,
And everybody has access, right?
Yeah, I think I'm looking around.
Okay.
Senator Lyons, do you have it? Did you? Yep. Okay. Great. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So for the record, Jim Desmarais, Ledge Council, we are going into draft 3.2 of your committee bill on literacy, and a number of changes here. Start with the statement of purpose. So it says the bill proposes to put in place the groundwork for improving literacy for all students in the state, while recognizing that achieving this goal will require a multi-year and multi-dimensional effort, requiring continued focus by the General Assembly, the administration, and school leaders. And then going over the findings are the same. So we have a purpose section on page 2, which is the same language as I just read, but now it's part of the bill, so you won't lose that because the statement of purpose as introduced goes away when the act is enacted. So this will live with the act. And then section 3 on page 5, we have increased the appropriation from 500,000 to 3 million for these grants to train teachers in methods of teaching literacy. We've also expanded on the factors that the agency needs to take into account in awarding the grant money. And I made these up, but just as points that we can discuss. The following factors: the literacy assessment scores of students within the SU or SD that's defined, the number of literacy instructors per enrolled students in the SU or SD, the percentage of students eligible for free or reduced price meals, which might be a proxy, and the number of students subject to exclusion or discipline for enrolled students, which may be a proxy for disengaged students who may be disengaged because of lack of literacy skills. Should I pause there?
Sure, that'd be a great spot to pause. Thanks. So a couple of things, committee members. We're going to hear today from, I think, at least one person that, and we're hearing from other people, that $500,000 of a commitment is a small start. So this was increased significantly, and I have sent it to Joint Fiscal to make sure it matches up in terms of possibilities for us to get from appropriations. So again, it's a number that could be in flux in a way, but two things are happening here. We will send our appropriations letter that Senator Kitchell and others would just like basically dollar amounts. They are not going to be putting in policy. And so there will be, at the same time that's being worked on, you'll see this bill come to the floor with some more direction and some framework around it. The language that Jim put in there is certainly negotiable. I think what it does is gives the agency some direction, and we'll be hearing from the agency on this language, but thought we might put some construct around it for them to consider. The one thing that I wonder if we might want to put in, Jim, is, the following factors should be taken into account, but not limited to these factors. In other words, there might be other things that the agency wants to take into consideration. But as Jim went through, he put in test scores, enrollment, free and reduced lunch, and then students that might not be sort of connected to school. So with that, any comments about Section 3? Please, Senator Terenzini.
Thank you. Really, probably a very freshman legislator question, but we had talked 500,000. Now we're looking at 3 million. Obviously, a big difference. And my biggest area of opportunity as a freshman senator is to learn how the budgeting process works and where the money comes from and goes to and so on. So I asked this question, the $3 million, at the end of the day, that has to be raised by taxes, correct?
No, so let me just, yes, in from somewhere. These are federal funds. These are the federal expedited funds. So these are funds that we are receiving from the federal government.
Okay.
And there are, just so you know, Senator Terenzini, these will not come out of the big bill, the budget. These are funds that Senate Appropriations has now before them that they plan to send out a sort of, if you will, mini bill. We've already done budget adjustment, sort of looking at where things are sugaring off last year compared to this year. Now we have these expedited funds, and Senator Kitchell has said, all right, what are the big things that, this committee feels as though it should get some federal funds for? And so we thought literacy, without a doubt, certainly getting people prepared for the summer, and then also CCV and access to higher ed. So there'll be more discussions in this committee related to the budget and related to any other federal funds that might come in. But these are just the expedited funds. Is that helpful? And Jim, correct me if I got something wrong there, or anybody.
So that was really helpful, because I could hear a constituent that I could see in the grocery store saying, hey, I think it's great you guys are tackling literacy, but did you raise Vermonters' taxes by $3 million to accomplish it? So I just want to be able to articulate the answer when people say, hey, it's great, but it's a lot of money. How did you do it?
Absolutely. And one of the things you might consider, to Senator Terenzini, that I did, it's great that for those of you who aren't going, there is a education discussion at 4:00 by Public Assets on education funding. But it might make sense for you to also, and I'm happy to set this up for you and with you, Stephanie, who supports the work of the Appropriations Committee. She would be a great person just to talk about these kinds of issues with you. I mean, honestly, when I went through those tutorials, they were very helpful, and I forgot them, and it's sort of John Dewey, learning by doing, but
right.
It might give you an opportunity to ask questions of somebody very knowledgeable.
Great. Thank you.
You bet. Senator Perschlick.
Yes, I had a comment on the use of the word scores.
Yeah.
I don't know if it matters. I think you get the point, but I think on some of these assessments, there isn't really a score. Like there's not a number. It could be wrong. I mean, I don't think it's going to matter all that much. People get the idea, but it just struck me as maybe not the right word.
Yeah, I think I'm comfortable striking that unless other committee members feel it's important. I mean, assessment can certainly be scores, but it also can be classroom time with the teacher, reading specialist, and we are assessing based on another kind of test. So I think assessment kind of covers it. Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And thank you for those comments about the funding. I could certainly use that tutorial as well. My question about the 3 million does it have restrictions? Do we have to spend it by a certain time? And will we be able to, given that time restriction?
Great question. So it's one-time monies. So, and I'll go back to Senator Kitchell, and they will, I'm sure, weigh in on this once it gets to them, of course, and also hear testimony. But my takeaway from my meeting with Appropriations is, again, one-time money. It likely will need to be, it's going to be allocated right away, and whether or not it is used within a year or not, I think there's some flexibility, but I don't think people are looking for these one-time expedited funds to go beyond this year.
And just a second follow-up to that, is this the 200 million, the same pot that the governor is talking about? Is this the money?
That's something maybe Ledge Council knows more about. It's Appropriations with me has just been talking about these are funds that they feel are going to be expedited. I'm not sure, but I can get details for you on that. Okay. And we can actually, before we sort of send it down the hallway, have somebody come in and answer some of these more technical questions.
Thank you.
Yep. Anything else? Okay, Jim, I'm sorry, Senator Perslick, please.
Jim, can you explain one more time what you meant by that last bullet point of the students that have been expelled and how that kind of relates to literacy?
Well, yeah. So the first two are obviously directly on point about literacy. The second two are proxies that, just in my mind, proxies. So 4 is if students are subject to exclusion or discipline, have a higher percentage. I'm assuming that they're disengaged from school in some way. They're not really engaging with the instruction. And I'm assuming, therefore, that might be because they can't really comprehend the instruction, which goes to literacy. So it might be a bad proxy. I'm not sure. I just put it down there as something to talk about.
And did Senator Campion, did you mention a may? Because it just says it's a shall for these 4 things. You were saying they could do additional ones.
Yeah, the way I had just jotted it down was, but not limited to. I mean, these are things that should be considered, but not limited to. I think there should be some flexibility there. And again, for where I'm sitting at least, I trust the agency is, of course, going to do and direct their funds in this way, but some guidance, I think Appropriations and others would make things a little bit more comfortable.
Okay, thank you.
While we're on this topic, Jeannie, if you would invite Catherine Benham and Steve Klein in tomorrow just to answer questions so that senators can answer them from constituents and others around, is this part of this pot of money or is it from that pot of money? Just so everybody is clear. I think that would be helpful to people.
Will do.
Thank you. Other questions related to this section? And Senator Perslick, would you prefer to have different language or is that flexible enough? Would you rather have a may or does that?
I'm okay now, but I'll think about it. Maybe
Okay, next section.
Next section is unchanged, and that's the creation of the literacy division at AOE. No appropriation yet. I think you're waiting to hear back from AOE on that.
So
Section 5.
if I may, so section 4, again, what we'll hear from the agency is, we're all here when I asked for the org chart to get a sense of what kind of supports they have. Do they feel as though they have enough supports? Does the legislature want to direct them more specifically around having some kind of structure within the agency so that literacy instruction is ongoing? It's not one investment with one-time funds, and then we're asking ourselves down the road, how can we, again, return to, or if we find ourselves returning to the problem that we're facing right now. So we'll have the agency in. They may say, listen, we're all for beefing up our agency and having 5 people or 3 people as literacy specialists that could go to schools, that can train people. I mean, that's sort of where I'm hoping we'll go if it's not happening already. They may say, hey, we're good. We don't need anything. We can just shuffle the chairs and responsibilities around. At that point, I think this committee and appropriations will have to make a decision. Do we say, that's fine, but we're not comfortable with that? We really do believe this warrants, a staffing uptick, or that it's going to be business as usual. So that's where I see that as happening. That whole section could get completely striked if they come in and say, hey, we've got these 5 people, they're knocking it out of the park and we're just getting going, and hopefully everybody will be happy with that. Or we'll put in an appropriation and give them more direction. Any questions there? Okay, I find I probably have had too much coffee because I'm hearing myself talk too quickly. So with that, Jim, please.
Okay, so section 5 is new. And it's around creating literacy vision. So it says on before December 1st of this year, AOE, in collaboration with the V's, shall develop a statewide vision for literacy, including the core principles for early literacy instructional practices and a clear articulation of expectations for Tier 1, 2, and 3 literacy instruction.
And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that this is something that we heard from our 2 superintendent colleagues, that this.
Correct. Gave testimony last week. Was it from Chelsea? I'm not sure who it was from. But,
and also Ms. Bronsteele.
Yeah.
Okay, not seeing any questions.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
The next section is new as well, came out of the same testimony from last week. It's around data collection. It says on before December 1, 2021, AOE, in collaboration with the V's again, shall develop a plan for collecting literacy-related data that informs 1, literacy instructional practices, 2, teacher professional development in the field of literacy, 3, what proficiencies and other skills should be measured through literacy assessments, and 4, how to identify school progress in achieving literacy outcomes.
Again, I want to give credit to our witnesses on these kinds of things. I feel like they've really helped to make this tighter and much stronger. Any questions before we move on to reporting? Okay.
Section 7, before we get to reporting, Section 7 on teacher prep programs, we've added a definition of science-based literacy. But having said that, I had trouble finding a definition of this, and I actually cobbled this together from a couple of different sources, so I don't know if this is a good definition or not. But I'll read it. It says on line 8, science-based literacy uses a body of scientifically validated and replicable studies of both literacy instruction and human processing to provide a more thorough understanding of what processes are involved in literacy, where challenges generally occur, and what preventive or remedial instruction can be implemented.
Thanks for taking a stab at that. I think some of our witnesses might be able to weigh in on this. I also know that I'm interested in hearing again from Chelsea and Libby before we take action on this, maybe next week. So that's something that I think, again, I appreciate you taking the first stab at it, and we'll see what our witnesses today and going forward say. It's interesting in a way. Yeah, I do have the same questions. So great. Reports.
Okay, reports. So a new section here on reports. So on report December 15th of this year, AOE shall report its findings and recommendations under this act and its progress in achieving the purpose of this act to you. And again, the purpose of this act is back in the new section 2. So just to remind you that there is a purpose set forth. And then subsection B is a report due on each of December 15 of 2022 and 2023 from the agency on statewide progress in achieving the purpose of this act. And then the effective date is on passage.
We'll have to hear from the agency on that and see if that gives them enough time, or if perhaps they'd like more time. Senator Perchlik.
Well, I was going to say the purpose doesn't say anything about actually improving literacy, but maybe because the reporting is so short term, we're not expecting actual improvements in 1 or 2 years. So maybe, at first I was going to suggest we specifically say that's the purpose, but I think maybe that's the longer term goal, and this is a short term focus.
So you're going, just to clarify, you're going back the original where we're talking about the groundwork for improving and not actually improving.
Right.
Yeah.
But because the reports are about the purpose of the bill. So if this is the purpose, they could, I mean, maybe it goes without saying that the groundwork for improving means that we want it to improve, but.
Yeah, no, I think you raise a really good point. I'm having another cup of coffee delivered. Sorry. So, I'm
just kind of thinking out loud. I don't have.
Yeah, no, I appreciate this. I mean, we could say the bill proposes, we are trying to improve literacy for all students in the state. We could simply say, instead of putting the groundwork down, I'm certainly comfortable changing that to, again, the bill proposes to improve literacy for all students in the state while recognizing that achieving the goal will require a multi-year, multi-dimensional effort. What do others think? Senator Hooker?
I think, just by saying something like with the ongoing goal of improving literacy, this bill lays the groundwork or something to that effect. And Jim,
that's great, actually. Yeah, with the ongoing goal of improving literacy. Senators,
that way it talks about, long-term, and, this isn't just a one-off.
Right. This is going to take a while. Vermont is not an anomaly. Other states are dealing with literacy issues, and it can take a little while. Senator Perchlik, what do you think of that?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Hooker. Any other questions or comments before we move to our witnesses? We have, as I recall, a couple of individuals in that Senator Chinden was helpful in identifying, and then we also have 2 individuals here from Williamstown School, where we have heard, I feel like we have celebrities in the room, that Williamstown has done just incredible work over the years to improve literacy rates, and we're looking forward to hearing from them. So let's continue on this theme. Mr. Anderson, it's great to see your name here with us. And if you don't mind, if you're listening, we will come back to you after we finish the conversation on literacy. And no apologies necessary for going to the House before the Senate. It's just understood.
I was in the Senate, so no apologies needed, I guess.
Okay, I didn't know that. All right. But if you're okay with that, we'll just do literacy for a little bit and then, okay, terrific. All right, with that, let's see. Ms. Carmoli, would you like to kick us off? If you don't mind just introducing yourself for the record, telling us a little bit about your work, and if you'd be so kind as to respond to some of the work that we've been doing.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It came first from Senator Chittenden and from you, Senator Campion. It's a real honor to be here today. Thank you. I am Gwen Carmoli. I'm the Director of Curriculum for Colchester School District. I also serve as the president of the Champlain Valley Educator Development Center, which is the professional development, used to be called an ESA for the Northwest section of Vermont for professional learning. And I serve on the steering committee for the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association called VICLA. So I represent sort of the curriculum perspective of this and a district perspective. I've worked in Colchester as a director of curriculum for the past 15 years and have been lucky to be in Colchester for my entire career since 1991. So I have a perspective of literacy is really critical to every single student. So I really want to thank you for the time that you're taking on this. It sounds like you're really committed to providing a bill that provides dollars and support for professional development. And I love this ongoing goal that you have, and I share it, of increasing instructional outcome, increasing literacy, and improving the literacy outcomes for our students. I have a few points that I wanted to make as I was reading through the bill. And I haven't read the most recent version. Mine left off at section 4, so there were a few new things in today that were introduced that I might comment on a little later on. And before I get into my points, I'd also like to say I'm here with Dr. Marjorie Lipson, who is the most amazing literacy specialist. She's researcher, professor emeritus at University of Vermont, author of text on how to teach literacy and how to understand reading difficulty. She's the literacy expert in the room. So I am so delighted to be here with you and with her. So thank you. My first point is that change takes time. Changing our literacy outcomes is something we've been working on across the state for quite a while. And we have had a lot of different initiatives that relate to this. We've been working on proficiencies and proficiency-based systems, multi-tiered systems of support, continuous improvement of learning, improving our social emotional outcomes, and much, much more. As you, I'm sure, know, schools are incredibly busy on any given day. And part of this work that they're working on is continuously improving outcomes for students. You'll probably hear as you meet with school officials, they'll talk about PLCs, professional learning communities, where they're doing data teams and they're working on continuous improvement or their continuous improvement plans. You're going to start to hear in the next month or so about recovery plans. So we're always working on growth and improvement. And a goal that we all share is increasing outcomes for students in academics, in social emotional ways as well. And we recognize that they're tied together. Michael Fullen, who's an educational researcher, is the person who has really made a huge difference in Canada, the country just north of us, in taking a full system and changing their educational outcomes. He took them from sort of middle of the pack scores on their literacy, mathematics, and science on the PISA assessment, and they moved up as high as number 4 in the international ranks of education. He really knows educational reform. he wrote a book recently about called Coherence, and another about change theory for schools. And he says change takes time. And he's really specific that it takes 3 to 5 years. And that's when you have things like incredible focus and collaborative work on a common goal. Those things, you have to have those pieces in place. So the fact that you're working on this, that our agency of education is working on this, that our U.S. agency is supporting us right now, our school systems, we've got some really good things in place. And we probably need a little more time on this one. My next point is that in order for this to work, we really need to think about the broad span of literacy, broad span being from kindergarten through grade 12, and I might even say pre-K through grade 12, because we have students as young as 3 years old that we are working with across our state and have a strong commitment to that. And then through the end of high school. The goal is career or college ready. And I say career, I personally like to say career and college ready, because to me, I want students to be ready for either one and both. But our goal is to have students ready for life beyond school. Literacy is a set of skills and dispositions that starts in the earliest years and in our earliest grades and then moves through graduation. It also is more than just reading. And I say that because some of the people, sometimes we talk about literacy and what gets talked about is early literacy or early reading. And I would invite the committee to consider that it is reading, writing, speaking and listening, and our language skills. Those are all inside our state standards. And it's every grade. It's something that we have to assess. And we need to have it as a local assessment. We're required to have a local assessment plan. And we begin that in kindergarten. In my district, we do it 3 times a year. And we start with letters, letter identification, sounds, the phonemes, and then we move into phonics, we move into fluency, we move into comprehension, we assess writing, we assess speaking and listening. So we are assessing things at what we would call our benchmarks or our trimesters 3 times a year, beginning from the beginning of kindergarten through 9th grade, and then it goes into course assessments. At the statewide level, literacy is assessed on the Smarter Balanced Assessment. We call it SBAC, and that begins in the spring of grade 3 and happens annually each spring, 3rd grade through 9th grade. SBAC assesses reading, writing, and it even assesses listening skills. And they are asked to assess literary, informational, and opinion text. So students sometimes are reading those texts, sometimes they're responding to those texts, sometimes they're creating the text. So it varies what the task is, but it's always complex. And they're asked to apply analysis and interpretation of all 3 genres. When you're thinking about this bill, I'm going to ask you to think about that full array of what they're assessed on and that full array of the grades that they're assessed on, because some of the organizations that come forward that are talking about professional development are talking about a narrow slice of that or a narrow span of the years. We're assessed on the broad range of them, all of the literacy areas and all of the grades. The other thing that I would point out is that literacy instruction is really complex, and Dr. Lipson can speak to this far better than I can, that as we are talking about it from a school district point of view, I have to think about it for all students. Then I have to think about it for some students who need some intervention, and I need to think about it for some who need intensive intervention. So when we're looking at training methods or professional development on literacy instruction, it's really important that we're thinking about that universal and all for our students when I'm developing a system. Very, very important. And I need to get to that analysis, interpretation, and response to text. If I don't get to that in my training for my teachers or the instruction in the classroom, we're going to miss a lot of skills and dispositions that are being assessed in Smarter Balanced. Another thing I'd like you to consider is please align the requirements and regulations with some of the things we already have. We're incredibly busy in our districts, just as you are, and more so probably this year with COVID. So we're in scramble mode right now. We have a lot of requirements from the Every Student Succeeds Act, from education quality standards, and we've worked really hard to meet these requirements. I work in district, and then I'm connecting with curriculum colleagues all the time, and we're always working on how we can best meet these requirements and expectations. One of the ones that really stood out to me was in the draft bill, there were 2 mentions of science-based approaches, I believe. In Every Student Succeeds Act, we are asked to have evidence-based. We have to provide our evidence of evidence-based instructional programs or practices when we apply for our federal funds. Science-based would not get there. And some of the science-based programs that get mentioned or approaches that get mentioned don't show up in the evidence-based place. So I brought a little show and tell. I wanted to show you where we find our evidence. The Institute of Educational Sciences, IES, on the U.S. Department of Education, has something called the What Works Clearinghouse, and they have programs they have ratings of programs based on juried studies of programs or instructional practices. And then it will give a plus or a minus and detailed information about the study. They usually give a pretty thick guide. And then they have these things called practice guides. And the practice guides are really important because they're really about the instructional approaches and the efficacy levels that come out of the research that's done on these to show what works for students. I brought just a couple to mention for you, and I'll mention those at the end, but I wanted to let you know that evidence-based is really important for us.
Right.
There are many good things that are mentioned in in some of the programs that have the science-based, but it may not meet the threshold of evidence-based, and we have that requirement. We also have a lot of different requirements we need to meet. The Every Student Succeeds Act, Educational Quality Standards, Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, Act 77, these are the flexible pathways, Act 173, which is special education funding and multi-tiered systems of supports. So as you're selecting language or as you're selecting professional development, if you could mention some of those other requirements, it helps line things up for us, and it helps us support the work that we're doing back in district and create that coherence and focus that Michael Fullen describes as so important for moving something forward. I want to give you a little example of what that looks like in Colchester and why some of these factors make a difference. In Colchester, as I mentioned, we have a local assessment plan. 3 times a year, we assess from kindergarten forward the phonemes, the phonetics, the fluency, comprehension, writing. We assess speaking and listening. We get about 90% of our students meeting or exceeding the standard on the earliest of our literacy skills, the phonemic and the phonetic assessment. That's great. When we assess fluency, by the end of 2nd grade, we get about 80 to 85%, and it fluctuates, but I'll set in the middle of that. I think we get about 82% of our students meeting or exceeding fluency by the end of 2nd grade. So it seems like we're really on track. And then we take SBAC, the Smarter Balanced Assessment, in the spring of grade 3. But it's assessing much deeper skills. And our most recent SBAC score came in at 56% meeting or exceeding standard. They were assessed on reading and writing and listening, analyzing and interpreting. Now, I could have thought I was going to do great, that my students were going to do great. But in fact, what it showed was we have some work to do. And we have some work to do on that comprehension, on that analysis and interpretation. And we would love to get more of our students. So move the 90 into the 100% range, or move that 80 to 85% up. So we certainly have work to do on any of the smaller skills. But our big work is actually on the big, broad literacy area. I picked grade 3 to show the difference between some of the professional development and conversation that's happening about early literacy, or that struggling reader, is really different from everything that we are being assessed on Smart and Balanced. Grade 3 illustrates this really well. We have great outcomes in our primary grades, and we fell down in our Smart and Balanced. We have to go farther than that. So I just wanted you to understand. Now, we're not satisfied with 56%. We're going to work a lot harder, and we have been working on this. But I wanted you to see that there was a difference between having a curriculum and having assessments and having positive outcomes on phonics and phonemes and early fluency, and the full breadth of the literacy standards.
That's
so
very helpful.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I just, it's incredibly helpful. And your testimony so far has been so honest and thoughtful. So thank you. One of the things that, we are trying to do, as you know, and you probably heard us talk a little bit about this, was put some one-time monies into training teachers so that they can, refresh their skills, have some new skills. And those trainings would be directed, or who would get those trainings initially would be, through sort of the Agency of Education Clearinghouse, because it makes the most sense. They can identify where the needs are. And so I guess I'm just putting that, I also appreciate you saying this is going to take a while. So that's sort of how we are working to address some of the issues that you've raised, as well as the issues that we've heard. And I'm just wondering if you could respond to that a little bit. If, for example, a teacher were to take the $2,500 and go to the Stern Center for 9 months, or go to another recognized program to, beef up or improve or have a rework, if you will, of their skills, does that sound like a good strategy?
Well, having dollars for professional development is a good strategy, right. But I would say that some of the professional development is premised on what they would say is that science-based, right, which doesn't meet the criteria of evidence-based. So right. If you're going to tie dollars to it, if you could help us by connecting it to that evidence-based, either the instructional strategies or programs. Right. So one of the programs that they heavily promote does not have an efficacy base. They've had a long time to create that efficacy base, but it doesn't have enough data for an efficacy base in What Works Clearinghouse.
So
that's a challenge for us.
Yeah, who doesn't?
One of the programs at the Stern Center, some of the professional development that they provide based on a particular program.
I see. Okay.
So as you're, I guess if you're thinking about training, some of the things that are really important to us from a district, from a training point of view, is that the training is connected to multi-tiered systems of support. Mm-hmm. That those benchmarks of assessment that we're doing are connected to our instruction. I heard you say that a little bit earlier. I think it was section 6 or 7 in the new draft. You were saying there was a mention of the professional development needs to be connected to data that we're collecting that informs our instruction, that is based on our full set of standards. Some of the professional development that's out there is high quality for a struggling reader, or for a subset of the standards, which might be the earliest reading. It may not fully connect to evidence-based, or it may not connect to the full breadth of literacy that we're looking for. So I think it's really important that it's mentioned that it's multi-tiered systems of support, which connects to some of our requirements, and that it's evidence-based. That's part of our federal requirement. But Dr. Lipson, I think, could answer this question a lot better.
No, but that's very helpful, and I appreciate it. We've heard from, we started this conversation with a Dr. Newman out of NYU, I know, who has, when we started to look at what we were doing around literacy and some of what our scores were looking like. And we've, taken a look at, again, what some states that are really making improvements, Massachusetts, Mississippi, what is it that they're doing that we're not, and how can we start to, again, invest in getting students to be reading at grade level by the time they get to third grade. I mean, one person said, those scores might be off. I said, okay, fine, but let's say it's even 1 out of every 4, or 1 out of every 5 students isn't reading at grade level. We still have an issue that we need to address, and that's what we're working toward. I think we also have identified and agreed with your statement that literacy is a key to the future. It can be tracked and traced to not having reading at grade level can be traced to difficulty going forward. And so that's kind of how we are trying to be somewhat surgical, if you will, and direct. We are not, actually, I would say there are some people on this committee that are, there are teachers, there are parents that have some expertise in this area, but not nearly as much as you and your colleagues. So with that, I think I will shift, if I may, to Dr. Lipson. Dr. Lipson, thank you for being with us. Appreciate the time that you're about to give us. You've heard this conversation. We've heard also from some of your colleagues around the country when we first started looking at this issue. And I'm interested, we're all interested in your thoughts on how we can make improvements.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Do you need any background on me? Should I just skip that? Or
we've heard amazing things about you.
Maybe I should just be quiet then.
No, a little background would be great.
Right.
We can give you, we're trying to keep witnesses to about 20 minutes. So a little bit of background would be terrific.
So my name is Marge Lipson. I'm a Emerita faculty member from UVM. My area of expertise is literacy, particularly K-6 literacy, and especially reading and reading difficulties. I've published 5 textbooks on reading difficulties and what we used to call remediation, now more likely to call intervention, and about reading generally. As well as reading beyond the primary grades. In the last 2 decades or so, I've spent most of my time and focus on those things, but in particular on working with educators and leaders here in Vermont, striving for whole school improvement in the area of literacy. I'll try to be responsive to things I hear that you've already taken up that I was not aware of. I'll weigh in a little bit, and I apologize if I make a comment about something you've already abandoned or
no problem
as important. Before I was an academic, I was a classroom teacher, and there is no year in my career where I wasn't involved with school-based efforts. So it's important to me. I became an academic because I wanted to make a difference. So thank you, because I know each of you share that concern and want to make a difference. I am at least as concerned about the outcomes we have in literacy here in Vermont as any of you is. I do, while I am dismayed that we don't have more children who are more successful or more students who are more successful over time, I do feel compelled to remind you that we are among the highest performing states in the country. Our data are right. There are only 5 states that do better than we do. And that's a fairly recent development, one worth worrying about, part of the reason I'm continuing to be concerned about it. I testified last week in the House at their invitation about the bill they're entertaining having to do with literacy. And while I know there are significant differences between what you're proposing and what they are, my understanding is you are both focused on the issues of the 2018 Acts and Act 173, the recommendations regarding that. because of that, and because my testimony with them was substantial, I'm wondering if I can ask for your permission to enter my testimony from last week into your files so that I don't have to repeat it today and can focus on what you are entertaining.
Sure, absolutely. And just for you, so you know, I know we know the House is doing something. I think it's quite different. I don't know if they're looking to, last I spoke with the chair, I don't think they're moving in the direction we are, or they're waiting for us to take this step in terms of appropriating dollars for teacher training.
I think what they're doing is a possible mind meld with what you're doing, but yes, they look quite different on their face.
Yeah.
Whether they have to be, I think, is an issue you will all, be able to resolve. The other reason I want to enter that testimony is it contains as well a very extensive, ridiculously long list of research having to do with the topics you're considering. And for me, that's important. I don't like a cult of personality. I think this work's too important for any one person to rest on their laurels. So you should know that when I speak not only from my own experience and the research that I've conducted, but from wide reading in the field. So as I understand it, the bill you're proposing is the legislation you're proposing has three foci. One is to make grants to supervisory unions so that they can train teachers in the methods of teaching literacy. A second is to create a literacy division at the AOE focused on statewide improvement. And the third is requiring the agency to investigate teacher preparation programs around the state to ensure that they use science-based literacy materials and programs. So I want to talk about each of those 3 points, and then I'm going to tell you what I'd really love to have happen. So the first thing is that in my previous testimony in the agency, in the House, the one part that it is relevant to your very first point, though it may not look like it, is that I would be very dismayed if we focused on training teachers. Even the language is a little worrying to me, but training teachers in the absence of any consideration of the systemic supports in place for them to be successful. For too long, we have imagined that teachers can fix this problem and that the problem rests on the shoulders of teachers alone. Certainly, I spent my whole career trying to improve teacher expertise. There is no single thing that's more important. The problem is our systems can undermine teacher expertise, and they do it all the time. When we were working on a project about 5 years ago, a principal said, yeah, but just tell me what you want the teachers to know, because that's really where it matters. And I said, well, let me ask you this. How much time does your schedule provide for teachers to do the work that you're training them to do? Have you examined it so that you're sure there are not conflicts? Is it possible for teachers to do the work that you're asking them to do, given the systems you have in place? And the answer is almost always not really.
Sure.
So we need to consider the system as well as the teachers. And so when I talked to the House, I mentioned 3 things. I can expand on any one of them, but I won't right now. One is educator expertise, and that includes both expertise in understanding the literacy process and reading in particular, as well as what it means to do that in the real world where we have diverse students and very complex social settings. None of which are really similar to each other. Gwen is the shepherd for one of the more remarkable and comprehensive systems supporting teachers in the state. But I know very well that there are schools and districts out there who have a very thin layer of support for teachers and whose students are in classrooms quite different than the ones that are in Colchester. So teacher expertise is important. The effective systems that include creating assessment systems that are informative, as well as collecting assessment data that people know how to analyze and make use of. We admire our data more than we use it right now, sometimes because it's not particularly useful, but sometimes because people don't really know how to do that. The third issue I raised was the concern I have over sustainability. We have a dramatically serious problem in the state of Vermont sustaining the good work we start. When you look at my testimony from last week, you'll find an extensive example where the district did remarkable things over a 3-year period, truly remarkable things over a 3-year period. And by the year 5 after we left that district, their data looked quite a lot like they did before we'd ever entered it. Why? Because superintendents left, principals left, literacy experts left, teachers left. So we have to think very hard about how we sustain the work. And I'm really sensitive to the issue that I think Senator Terrazini, perhaps it was you, was asking when I entered, which is the return on our investment. It does very little for us to spend a lot of money and then have the good results evaporate on us. So,
and if I could just respond to what you said, all right? Just, yeah, I appreciate what you said around the other issues. And for us, as you know, I mean, we can do certain things in this committee. There are certain things we can't do in this committee. You know, yeah, in some ways you could say we could legislate anything, but right now we're looking at making a funding investment to train teachers. We are not in the position right now to work on schedules, to work on those kinds of things. I'm not saying they can't happen, but I just want to be, you know, honest with you. I think between some of the testimony we've heard and appropriations has now taken, there's a problem. I mean, there is a problem in this state, whether we're the best in the country or not. Just reflects perhaps on the rest of the country. And so
I agree.
What we have right now is the ability with one-time funding to try to make a difference. And so that's what I really would love for you to, if you could, just focus on, almost forget what the House is doing, only because we don't know what the House is doing. And just tell us, you know, if we were to make this appropriation, would it in a way, and we're able to sustain it, the work through the Agency of Education and building the supports, would we be able to make a difference? And we're hearing from, after this, the 2 faculty members from Williamstown that seem to have made some progress in this regard. So, and I just say all this in terms of, I just want to be clear what we can do and what we can't do, and what the possibilities, if you would, we have right now, because, you know, some ways, Doctor, we may not see these kinds of federal funds again. And they are one-time funds. So I want to sort of dwell in the world of possibilities and try to make some headway.
I completely appreciate that. And I'm going to come back to that just in a minute, because I am forced to say to you that if you only invest in teachers, you will be disappointed. 5 years from now, I wish I could say it was different. The reason I started doing whole school reform was I felt like I could spend the next 40 years working with teachers, small groups of teachers, improving their practice, only to have that disappear if we don't attend to some other things. So let me talk about 2 other things, and I want to come right back to that, because I do have concerns even about that. The second thing I want to say, I know that you're proposing a new division at the agency. I'll leave it to them to decide. I can't imagine that cost is not prohibitive, but and so I would ask you instead to think about developing regional expertise that might have some potential for sustaining in the regions around the state. If the agency can find the right people to do this work for the amount of money they typically pay, that would be fabulous. There is nobody I know who wouldn't love to have greater expertise at the agency level. And the third element that you want to talk about is one I know well, and that is teacher preparation. I'm a little confused about it because the Agency of Education already reviews every teacher preparation program in the state using criteria that they have established, and they can establish any criteria they want. So every teacher prep program in the state is reviewed about every 3 to 5 years, very extensively. The way this has been done in the past, particularly because it's linked in your proposed legislation around science of reading, what they've typically done is look at this so-called science of reading and looked at syllabi and say, do these magic words appear in the syllabi, or is it in the textbook? That's a little slippery slope. You don't know, for one thing, if it's on the syllabus, it means it's actually being done. But importantly, if it isn't on the syllabus, doesn't mean it is not being done. So the agency has, I think, rightly looked at outcomes rather than inputs. They have used a results-oriented approval process to accredit institutions that is looking at the students who graduate and determining that they know this information. As well, they have to, if they're going to teach in Vermont at the K3 level, they have to pass a very demanding test of phonics decoding. This one I'm a little less clear about what you're going to get with that. I will tell you, if we're going to be as honest as Gwen is, that we have a very significant expertise problem in the state. Every one of the major higher teacher preparation programs in higher ed has a very, very thin level of expertise in the area of literacy right now. So demanding that somebody do something is only as good as the resources there to back that up, the same problem you're mentioning with regard to the other. I do have some ideas about that. So what would I like to see? I'd like to see, the first is that whatever grant activity you support requires that districts demonstrate how what they're proposing is coordinated with and coherent in terms of the work they're already doing. The state of Vermont has been enormously activist in the area of improving education over the last decade. There is legislation, there is policy, there's changed accreditation. We have a lot of things on the books, but districts get pulled in one way or another. So one of the things that could really make a difference is, even if it's about teacher training, professional learning, and for teachers, is to link it to other demands that schools already have, and that many of them have embraced or are trying to do well, really important, complicated work.
So we have a good. I just want to pause there for a moment. So we're looking at literacy, and we're trying to, we've heard from multiple people that, again, there needs to be some kind of training and improvement. I mean, out there, that there are teachers that maybe just need updated how to teach reading. It's a complicated thing, without a doubt. So I'm not sure what you mean by, are you saying that something else has to be taken off the table for teachers?
No, in fact, I'm saying the opposite.
Okay.
I'm saying that people already have a table that's been laid with lots of stuff on it.
Yeah.
Let's link teacher and whatever teacher professional development to some of the vehicles you already have. Gwen mentioned the Vermont MTSS, multi-tiered system of support. Multi-tiered systems of support rest almost exclusively on literacy and math. So you have a perfect vehicle for saying, all right, how are you providing a multi-tiered, or what we call, I'm one of the authors of the Vermont MTSS policy guide for the agency. It calls for a layered approach so that all students get what they need. Well, do teachers know how to do that?
Right. Now,
I will say, if the school's not organized so that kids can get differing levels of intense support, then that's a problem. But similarly, most of the schools we have exceedingly high standards for both teachers and administrators through our education quality standards. Bring those out, align what you want to do in the area of teacher education with those things that are already part and parcel of the legislative and policy environment here in Vermont. I'm really saying, bring it together. Don't add another thing.
Yeah.
Secondly, I'd like to see districts and partnerships demonstrate how their work is going to be systemic and sustained over time. If they cannot do that, then I'm not sure their investment is going to be rewarding for them or for us. It'll just be a one-time thing. I'd like us to recognize what Gwen has already talked about, that early literacy won't get us there by itself, no matter how robust, how phenomenal the early literacy is. If it's not, doesn't have its eye on coordination with the grades beyond grade 3, our results will continue to look flat, and we'll be dismayed by that, continue to be dismayed. I would also like to, well, actually, I think this one is one where you're already on the right track. The changes I hear you talking about and what you're proposing for assessment are just exactly the right ones. Creating an assessment system that has useful information in it, for diverse purposes is, I think, exactly the right thing. And then I want to return to the problem you were grappling with, and we were grappling with just a little while ago, which is, how do we in Vermont, not someplace else, not Massachusetts, which has a remarkably robust state agency with lots of resources to bring to bear to it, and many, many, many institutions that prepare teachers. We're here in Vermont. How can we understand and support the development, the long-term acquisition of expertise? If we had bigger capacity at the more expert level, then schools would be able to support their novice teachers. They would be able to do in-house some of the things they're presently hiring other people to do. We have a very robust coaching program going with our Partnerships for Literacy and Learning. But it's difficult to recruit local teachers to be coaches because they often don't have the level of expertise that allows them to work with other teachers. So we bring in, you get the idea.
Yeah.
And we have problems at the local level, but we have problems at the agency level. There's not, I can't imagine that Secretary French is going to come to you and say, I have all the literacy expertise here I need. Don't worry about that.
Sure.
I can tell you that the universities do not, and most school systems are struggling as more and more of the literacy expertise retires. That has rested on the backs of some quite veteran teachers. So we have to think, well, what could we do? How might we incentivize higher ed institutions to hire the right kind of faculty who can provide leadership at every level in the system and build the capacity to create experts in the field? So that's where we've lost ground in the state. We don't have the next tier of people to go out and be experts in their regions. And so it's quite problematic. And we have other resources. How do we mobilize the organizations we do have to provide some of that as well? So those are the kinds of things I think we need to be thinking about if we're not going to end up here in 2 years saying, what did we do with that money?
Sure. So how did we get to this problem, Doctor? I mean, this is the United States of America. We have 50% of our third graders in the state are reading at grade level based on those tests. You've been involved with this for a long, long time. It's disappointing at best. How did we end up here? What would you say the problem is or was?
Well, I probably don't know them all, but I could take a whack at a few of them. We have a brain drain in the field of education. We do. It would be foolish for us not. The number of people like Gwen who are really smart and have expert skills in a variety of levels, she could go to any organization and be a star. She chose education. We're really lucky she did, but there are a lot of choices out there today.
Yeah.
And there are many more of them than there were when I came along. So that's one, is we do have we need to start making it attractive for people to choose a teaching, whether that's by subsidizing the teacher. To get a teaching degree from the University of Vermont is astronomically expensive.
Yeah.
For the return on the dollar that family is going to get when their student graduates. So we have to figure out some of that. We have a second, and that is here in the States, we have an apparently infinite appetite for the quick fix. We are not patient people. And a part of me likes that a lot. We're doers. We want to go out there and get at it. But if you grab the first apple along the road and you don't see that there's an orchard, if you just walked a little bit further, then you got problems. And we have been doing that for an awfully long time. The amount, really, when I think of some of the money that's been thrown at the problems for how little. Now, I will also say we know a lot more. When I graduated, I'm ancient, but when I graduated, we really knew hardly anything at all about how reading takes place, what the neuroscience of it is, much less how you might acquire that ability. We know that now very well now. we know less about how to make it happen when you have complicated social environments. We also have a more diverse country than most. And so, whereas many countries can sort of take one approach and everybody gets on board, the parents, the community, the teachers, and the kids, we don't have that. And that makes any sort of real improvement challenging. But those are the three that come off the top of my head. Gwen, do you?
That's helpful.
Gwen's got one.
Yeah. Gwen, I do need to limit our time because we do have two teachers, but please tell us.
I was just going to give a quick example of something that derails our work, which impacts our results. I got a request in this past week for a professional development to attend from an organization that was based out west. It on the surface, it looked good, improved literacy scores or something to that effect. So you start digging in, and some of the premises that they have go against our evidence base, go against some of our requirements, and negate have very negative messages about some of the things we already have in place in our district. Had I said yes, and some of our teachers have attended these from different, and you can go online, there's tons of webinars right now about everything. It unravels the work we've been doing, and then it spreads really quickly. And it's on a quick fix, and it hurts our organizational coherence and work. So anyway, it really matters how things line up.
Who vets that, Gwen? I mean, there are legislative conferences also, but we sort of, know which ones to head to and maybe which ones don't. I imagine that's true with a lot of professions. So you're saying you have faculty that are signing up for things that might be, if they were to institute those policies, it could derail a child's education. So how is that getting to teachers, and why are they signing up?
It shows up in your inbox in the email. But to Dr. Lipson's idea, if you had to, as you were applying for your professional development, or if I were applying for this grant that you're going to perhaps have available for us, if I had to connect that to a coherent plan for us in our systemic progress forward, that would make a difference in what type of broad professional development we would work toward.
So, and then just to piggyback, so for example, if you were to fund teacher professional learning rather than training, the worst thing you could possibly do is simply make a menu and say, sign up for one of these, you'll be good, because it would automatically undermine whatever coherence and coordination you were likely to get at.
Right, that's out of our hands. I mean, what we would do is direct the agency to use these dollars to, get those dollars out to the schools and the individuals that need them the most. So it's out of the, once we would appropriate the funds, I mean, we're trying to give some guidance in terms of who best to get it to, but the agency would do that. Senator Hooker.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lipson and Gwen. It sounds to me as if, we've already begun doing this. We're working on this literacy issue, and we've been working on it, and whatever we do needs to connect with it. My question is, can we get an historical perspective on, Senator Campion said, how did we get here at 50% of our kids who are reading below level or are achieving the level? What was it like 25, 30 years ago? Have things fallen off dramatically? Are we at the same level? Are we looking to move up from a level that we've been at for a long time? I mean, this is something that obviously we're not going to be able to
but that is a fabulous question. That particular question is fabulous because we are more ambitious today too. We shouldn't beat ourselves without acknowledging by most people's measures, even our what look to be very thin results at the end of third grade, most people who can figure out how to create comparisons suggest that more students are performing better today than did 45 years ago. It's just that we ask more. Our students need to learn more, and more of them need to learn it. If you didn't do well when I was coming through high school, you simply dropped out and you got a pretty good job at one of the available surrounding businesses and could raise a family. And you cannot do that today. We expect all students to accomplish at a relatively high standard. So when Gwen talks about the demands of the SBAC, that's not exaggeration. These are demanding assessments that never before were given to children at this age, ever. This is relatively new, the last 20 years. And I celebrate it. I want us to do as well as we can do. But we shouldn't imagine that once everybody did great and now we don't. That's a different question.
Senator Lyons, final question.
Oh, okay, good. You know, as you're talking through all of this and saying how we've improved over this last several decades, I question whether and how our new technologies inform literacy. And obviously, when we're talking about new literacy programs, some of those could be electronic. So just maybe your thoughts on that. And it's something different, but would certainly like to hear what you have to say.
Well, it's actually where it's poking its head in right now would be when you consider what kinds of things you want to say about assessment, to be honest with you, because the greatest use of the greatest promised use of technology right now is in two places, and they're not the places I wished it would go. One is in hooking up kids who are struggling to a computer and letting them practice skills online, as opposed to working with the highest imaginably trained teacher they could find so that they could shape the instruction. The second is now in assessment. And I just heard a sad story the other day about a school district in Vermont that is using a computer-based assessment that actually has some great promise. The kids sit in front of the screen and they read out loud, and the computer captures that oral reading. Okay, and then you get back a little scored test without the teacher ever having to listen to the student read, which has a lot of appeal if you have 24, 25 kids who you want to do an assessment on. For students who do exceedingly well on those assessments, you're probably good to go. They're not a bad screening tool. But when I first looked at it, I listened to it, they had very young children reading on the demo. And I have a grandson who happens to have a fairly significant speech glitch. And I thought, there's no way in heck they would ever be able to get an accurate reading from my grandson, because he sounds so bad, even though what he's saying is not a reading problem, it's a speech problem. But this particular teacher was saying that she has a child who's reading at about 5th grade level in 4th grade. And the score that came back from this particular program was 2nd grade. And it happens that this is a second language speaker. So don't you suppose that the computer picked up the same difficulties in a second language speaker that my grandsons might? In other words, whatever we do, we just have to be very thoughtful about it and recognize both what it can get us and where we need to be careful.
Right. I need to end it there. This has been very helpful. I would encourage the two of you to stay on if possible. But I do want to, Ms. White, I see you're there, and I know you have been waiting patiently. I think there you are. You're both there. Terrific. So
I am going to have to leave. I'm sorry. I have a
well, we can always loop back to you. Thank you, Doctor. So Ms. White and Ms. Flynn, we've heard from multiple sources that your school has done some really remarkable things around literacy, improving literacy. You've heard some of this conversation. We are looking to make an investment to make some improvements in this area, and we'd love to hear how you've done it, and some of your thoughts on how we could help other schools do what the two of you have done. And I recognize that, again, you're taking the time out of your day to do this, so thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to talk about what we've done. My name is Kathleen Flynn. I am a kindergarten teacher here at Williamstown Elementary School. This is my 14th year here. I have 21 years of experience teaching preschool, kindergarten, and 1st grade. I'm going to let my colleague introduce herself.
So you're catching us at dismissal time. You might hear kids or bells. So sorry about that.
No problem.
But my name is Teresa White, and I'm a third, fourth, and fifth grade science teacher here, and also a reading interventionist with younger students. And this is my 14th year teaching. You want me to go first? Yeah. So Kathleen and I prepared some remarks. A lot of them are about our systems here, which have been crucial to, the gains that we've made and what we can provide students. But I heard that you said you were maybe not interested in hearing so much about that. So I just wanted to check in and see kind of exactly what information we can provide to you.
Oh, no. I think for us, the school sounds like it's done incredible things, and you've been mentioned by multiple witnesses, and so what we're trying to find out is what kinds of things have you done that allowed you to make the improvements in literacy that you've made. We have the possibility here of making a one-time investment. A couple of things. We can do a one-time investment. We have some federal funds that we are looking to make some improvements in literacy. And so one of the options would be to take these dollars, direct them to the Agency of Education and say, hey, let's get our teachers trained in the most updated ways around how to teach literacy. And some of those dollars could go to Stern, some of those dollars could go to other identified programs. It wouldn't be a free-for-all out there where you could just sort of jump online and, get money and perhaps do what Ms. Carmoli was raising, in making a bigger problem. So that's what we're talking about. And we're also talking about a more long-term sustainable program through the Agency of Education, basically saying to them, listen, this one-time investment's one thing. It could get several hundred, maybe even 1,000 teachers up to date, if you will, around training literacy. We've heard a lot of good testimony around that, support for that. And so now we're asking you guys sort of like, what is it that you did? Because it sounds like you're having success.
Great. Well,
does that help?
That does. We're just going to go with our prepared remarks.
Absolutely, because I'm sure whatever you're going to say, we're going to learn from you guys. So whatever works.
Wonderful.
Great.
So Kathleen and I were talking before the call and realized that both of us said that when we graduated from our teacher training programs, neither one of us felt like we really knew how to teach kids to read. And I think that's something that's important, for you to know at the outset, that we were really lacking, even though we went to wonderful programs, lacking that knowledge and that practical expertise. So here at Williamstown Elementary, kind of the first building block to the system that we have is our subject specialties. So you heard me mention that I teach science. All of our teachers above kindergarten have subject specialties. And what that does is that frees up their time to do interventions. So the reason that I can do Orton Gillingham intervention with younger students is because of this specialty model that affects our schedule. It also allows teachers to develop expertise in all of their subject areas, which includes literacy. So our humanities teachers focus their professional learning and their collegial meetings, their professional learning communities on teaching students to read and write. And so they're able to deepen their knowledge and deepen their skills. In addition, it allows us to provide continuity and alignment, which is something that we found is really critical to helping students read, is knowing what I'm responsible for teaching students to do, knowing what the person that's going to get them next is responsible and what they need. And so the subject specialty model has been really crucial to that. Following on that is professional learning. We have some thoughts about what that could be like. Our initial training was very intensive. not just a workshop 1 day or 2 days, very intensive training. And we received training in evidence-based methodology.
Okay, so evidence-based. And where was that training, Ms. White?
Both of us received training from the Stern Center.
The Stern.
Yes.
And again, it was, as you mentioned, evidence-based training. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a tremendous amount of evidence that talks about multisensory reading education and how effective that is for all students, but especially for students who are struggling readers. And I'm certainly not as well-versed as your other guests in talking about that, but I would encourage you to maybe find out more about how effective that is.
That's incredibly helpful to us because, as you probably heard, we've been grappling with the terminology as lay people in this area, and so that's extremely helpful. You reconfirming that.
Wonderful. So our initial training was intensive and in evidence-based methodologies. In addition, we had practicum support. So in my case, I took a week-and-a-half long graduate course, and then the following school year, I taught my lessons, and I had supervision and observation from a fellow, which was amazingly helpful as I refined my practice and learned from my mistakes. In addition, it helps that all of the teachers in our school were trained in the same methodology. We have a common language, our students have a common language, and we have similar goals and outcomes. We also have ongoing collaboration amongst teachers in various subject areas, and we can calibrate our work. So I heard testimony about that, kind of hard edge at 3rd grade, where some things change in terms of literacy achievement, and we're really working to have a continuous system and expectations through all of our grade levels. And that leads us to our multi-tiered system of supports, which I know that a few of your guests have mentioned. And that's really how we make sure every kid is getting what they need. So we have universal instruction in all of our classrooms that is evidence-based, it's rigorous, and it's consistent. If students aren't able to meet our goals for them with that universal instruction, then we're able to give them more targeted intervention. And that's the service that I provide to our students. It's provided by teacher interventionists who have a high level of training. And that helps many students kind of get back on track or gives them a boost they need so that they can then continue to receive what they need from the universal instruction at the classroom level. Some students have more intensive needs. These may be students on IEPs or with reading disabilities, and their needs are addressed through very intensive interventions with our special educators. So Kathleen and I wanted to make sure that you understood that range of levels of instruction and support is what we feel is a really important part of helping our students succeed here.
So one of the things that we've done that has really changed how we look at students is making sure that we have a significant amount of data through assessments on our students, making sure that we know as much as we can know about our students, and meeting in data teams on a regular basis so that we can discuss these students. We can discuss where they're coming in, what they've been doing. We can look at the data, the assessments, and then we can put together a plan as a team of where to go. And that might be pulling somebody like Teresa in to do an intervention. It might be talking with our SLPs and talking about ways that they can support them as well. These meetings, like I said, we meeting regularly to discuss our students.
Ms.
It's a
White,
broad team of
White,
many
all right.
professionals at the table that know the students and can talk to the individual student.
Ms. White, can you hear us?
I'm sorry, is there some difficulty?
There's a little difficulty. I don't know if it's
Yes, can you hear us?
now perfectly, crystal clear.
All right, I think I'll scoot you closer to Kathleen then.
Okay, that's great. Thank
Let
you.
us know if it's
Great.
Great, thank
So
you.
what I was saying was in our data team meetings that we have a broad team of professionals who know the student, and that could involve the interventionist, it can involve the classroom teacher, it might involve the special educator or the SLP. And we're meeting about the data, we're meeting about those assessments and talking about students. It's very goal oriented. We have documents that we use to fill out on students so we can track their progress. We can talk about, like I said, where they come in, what's working, what's not working, what we need to do differently. We need to revisit for next steps. Our students have what we call targeted plans, so that as a student moves, they can move in and out of intervention. And as they move into different grades, we have documents on where they were at and what their needs were. But, you know, our focus is on student support and how to take care of every individual's needs. But I have to say that part of that, as I hear everybody talking, literacy based, but also it's our community, the systems that we have in place developing our community, our PBIS system of supports and acknowledgement around behaviors. That's a huge piece. Our responsive classroom, every educator in our building has been trained with that. We actually have a social emotional curriculum that we've put together to support students. And I think that that has created a safe family atmosphere for our students where they feel safe to learn. They are supported, they feel belonging, everyone can succeed. Students know what they're not good at. Even at my level, at 5 years old, they know when something is difficult, and we know how to wrap around those kids rapidly and how to support them in feeling successful and how to boost their feelings about themselves and making sure that they know that we're here to support them no matter what and that they can make gains.
Ms. Flynn, did you get that, what you're talking about? And then I'll shift to Senator Hooker. What you're talking about in terms of that sort of philosophy, where did that come? Was that something that is just school culture there because you have leadership that creates it? Or is that something you kind of, where did that sort of, what was the genesis of that?
So again, I would say that it's around data. Everything that we've done over the past 7 to 10 years of my time here has been looking at the data, looking at what's going well, what's not going well, and what can we do to make it go better. So we're looking at office referrals, students who have been sent to the office for different behaviors. We look at why, we look at when, we look at time of day, we look at everything that goes into that. And then we look at strategies to support that student. What can we do differently? How can we make sure that they're feeling successful in the classroom? You know, it might be a break. If there's a certain time of day that just is not working for that student to learn, well, they're probably going to get sent to the office anyway. So why not give them that timely break? And that might be that they play a quick 5-minute Uno game and then they go back to the classroom and they're ready to learn. So really it was looking at those type of data systems and putting our systems together to support students in every way we could.
Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And thank you, teachers, for being here. As the chair has said, we've heard a lot of good things about Williamstown. And I'm wondering, you've mentioned, Ms. Smith, that it's been 7 to 10 years that you've been there working with this model. How long has the model been into effect? And for instance, was it a conscious decision to have subject specialty teachers in each, you know, that and that kind of model, rather than the typical elementary school teacher who's the generalist and, you know, has to teach all of the subjects?
It absolutely was a conscious decision. I was a part of the teams that were looking at the data around our student performance, and it was clear that we needed to make significant changes based on that data, and looking at what changes we could make immediately, and kind of interviewing the staff and knowing, you know, I feel really strong in math, I feel really strong in literacy, and it just kind of came to, how can we make people who feel strong in those things, provide them with more professional development to feel even stronger in those things, but also put systems in place where we can use what they feel strong with to not just support their grade level, but to become interventionists and support every student. It was an extremely conscious decision. And with a lot of players at the table, with a lot of people having input.
Okay, and how long has this been in effect? If you were part of it, then it's been there for at least how many years?
This is our 8th year.
8th year. Okay. We talked about the need for time, and this just moves us in that direction. Certainly.
Yeah, and I will say that we didn't start to see significant changes with the data with this until probably year 3 or 4. I think it takes a few years to get things going, and to really have these conscious conversations around the need to support teachers in their professional development and students in their needs as well.
And did that whole philosophy of community develop along with this? Was it there to begin with? Did you have the support of parents and the community around you, or was this something that you think has developed because you've gone to this system?
I think it's a mixture. I fully believe it's a mixture. I think that we've always had a strong community using what was already in existence. When I said the Blue Devil Way, well, the Blue Devils, that was a mascot at the high school, so we adopted it. That's what's strong in the community. So using that terminology pulled parents into a friendly wording, something that they graduated with. They knew that term. And then we used that to build on, okay, now what does the Blue Devil Way mean? You'll hear almost every teacher here saying, that's the Blue Devil Way, or we have an acknowledgement system where we say, great job being a Blue Devil. So we're using that terminology that's familiar with parents that they can also use at home. They can say, hey, I was a Blue Devil, and now you're being an awesome Blue Devil too. But we pulled systems into that to support what was familiar for families with our PBIS system and creating a strong acknowledgement system for students around positive behaviors as well. Not just responding to negative behaviors, but acknowledging positive behaviors as well.
Thank you.
The two of you are doing such great work and creating such an incredible educational culture. So thank you for that. It is quite interesting that, as you said, you left your training, undergraduate program, didn't really feel equipped to teach reading. And, we've talked about this in committee, and, it sounds, we've heard, I'd say most of our committee has heard, or most of our testimony has said, yes, let's make this kind of investment. Let's give people options. Let's direct it through the Agency of Education. We've also heard most people have said, in general, it's going to take time. It's going to be something that one investment you could, get a teacher, who might be working in a school after a program that leaves after 5 years because he or she meets somebody in another state and they leave or they retire or something happens. And that kind of goes back to the agency also kind of getting beefed up and making certain that they feel equipped to continue these investments and continue the work and kind of follow models similar to yours that the two of you have been involved in. Other questions? It's so much. Yes, please, Senator Lyons.
So I know you've talked about how you're spreading the Blue Devil across your peers and others in the community, but you two are the engine driving this. How are you planning for a future when you need to have new people driving the bus? I mean, so how sustainable are you making it? Because it sounds like it's such an awesome bit of work that you're doing, and certainly want to have it continue.
Well, it's funny that you ask that. We have in place at least once a month right now where we were asked by our curriculum coordinator if we had an expertise that we'd like to share. And I'm a part of a positive environment that has allowed me to take the risk and to put out a workshop. I actually just did my first one yesterday, and I hope to continue to do many more. This was a part of a workshop series that was part of our professional development day. And I put it out there. It was about differentiated instruction and phonics and reading and just how to boost those skills for young children. And I thought, well, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 people will join. I had 17 people join me for that. And this was kind of, there were a lot of options that were out there, and it was also a wellness day for teachers. So they could have taken a more relaxed approach to that hour. To have 17 people crave that knowledge and want to be a part of that, I think that speaks to what teachers want. We want more information. We want to learn more. And we're part of a system that allows us to share our expertise. You know, the people that I was in this conference with, one of the kindergarten teachers that had joined, this is his second year teaching. And he told me he gleaned so much from that simple 1 hour workshop that he stayed late in his classroom last night to start different activities, to go to his reading group tomorrow, to try this, and I'm going to try that. So I think that's a big piece of this, is getting us, people with some expertise, out there, sharing what we're doing and what's going well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say the systems exist beyond the teachers who are here. And we've been fortunate that they've been in place long enough that the evidence speaks for itself, that we can see that what we're doing changes kids' lives and changes the academic outcomes for them, as well as their social emotional outcomes. So that that success and that evidence means that these systems are going to stay in place no matter who's here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I can't thank you enough. You know, I know you're both incredibly busy, and for you to take the time out of your day to talk to us about your experiences is so helpful, particularly hearing from people who are right on the ground. You know, we're removed, and others are. The two of you are. We're on the ground all day and probably returning there right now. So thank you. And we may be back in contact as we make our way, you know, later in this session on different things related to literacy.
Please do. And I don't want to speak for Kathleen, but I think we'd love to invite you into our classrooms if that's a possibility, so you can see some of these things we've talked about. So please keep that in mind too.
We would like that very much.
Many people come and observe me for different things that I do well. I would love to have you come, and my kindergartners would think it was a treat.
That's great. Senator Hooker.
Just one question about the logistics of the, what do I call them? The subject specialty teachers. Are these the little ones going from teacher to teacher? Did the teachers go into the classrooms? I mean, I'm picturing these little ones looking like high school kids going from class to class.
So starting in first grade, students move from classroom to classroom. Their grade level rooms are nearby to each other, but in my experience, it's wonderful. The kids get a little movement break, they get a new setting, they get a new adult to interact with, and I think it's a real positive for them. It's not overwhelming even for the youngest students.
Great.
Thanks. Okay.
Thank you both. Have a great afternoon, and stay in touch.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Welcome back to Senate Education. We are kind of staying in the same general area in a way. We are hearing from the Department of Health first, and then from Mr. Nichols, but we're shifting to our letter to appropriations. And as I mentioned when we arrived, we have two documents going kind of simultaneously here. We have a letter to appropriations, which the chair basically said, just give me the numbers. They're not going to be putting in policy recommendations with these numbers. And we also have a literacy bill where we could frame some things around how dollars are spent, etc. So let's take a look at we're looking at two numbers. We're first going to be working with the Department of Health, and we'll be hearing from the Agency of Education, I believe it's tomorrow, on the first item that we mentioned in this letter to appropriations, and that has to do with the Agencies of Education and Department of Health. Thank you, Senator Lyons, for focusing on this. We before had DCF also there, but I think it makes sense for us to tighten this, have these two groups work together to educate parents on the signs of depression, suicide, and provide information and resources for assistance. This returns us to the conversation we had early on with our educational partners, superintendents, teachers, school board members, principals, etc., that identified, just mental health and trauma and students coming out of this experience. And I see with us, I believe, is it Mr. Englander that is going to speak to this? I'm not sure.
Mr. Chair, I'm available as ballast, but we actually have Elisa Stahlberg, who is the Director of Maternal and Child Health, and she's going to be the department's main witness.
Ms. Stahlberg, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is Elisa Stahlberg. I'm the Director of Maternal and Child Health at the Health Department. I also lead the School and Child Care branch of the Health Operations Center in the COVID response, and have been working very closely with the Agency of Education and the Child Development Division at DCF, particularly around the school and child care guidance as it relates to COVID. So appreciate you having me here, and I just will share a few thoughts and then happy to answer questions and talk to you more explicitly about what what the proposal is. But as you know, I believe you've received testimony on this topic quite a bit, but we are definitely seeing higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicidality, concerns around trauma among children and youth who are going through this response, as are their parents and families and all of us adults. We are deeply concerned, and we've done quite a bit also in partnership with the Department of Mental Health to provide some of that messaging very early on in the response, sort of anticipating this, but knowing that it's now going on a year. Many students are still not in school or not in school full time, and also knowing that we don't really know when it's going to end, and the impact of this is likely to last longer than even the pandemic. So I think attention to this topic is extremely important. As I mentioned, we work extremely closely with AOE, and I feel throughout this response, it's been a really positive partnership, and we're excited to be working with them, and we would certainly work very closely with them should this money be allocated and directed towards this effort. We certainly have a ton of experience doing this kind of work as it relates to communication around health and wellness concerns, and would look forward to the opportunity to be able to develop some materials and evidence-based messaging and supports for families should they need it in both identifying those concerns. There's certainly a lot of information out there for families, but it's not terribly well pulled together, and I don't know how accessible it is for families. So I think spending some energy in this arena would be really helpful, especially also as we move into the summer and thinking about the importance of summer and hopefully bringing more students together over the summer as an opportunity to grow their, social, emotional resilience on account of what's happened over the past year. So I will leave it at that. I'm happy to answer questions, talk to you more about whatever is on your mind.
Senator Lyons.
So thank you. This is terrific. And what an opportunity, don't you think, to really bring some mental health support to kids and families. Actually, the question I have is that this is seen as a real immediate need. And, once the money is there, to have something in place that will turn everybody around, it's the instant. so as you're thinking about it, and I'm sure you've been doing a lot of thinking about this as you're working with mental health folks and others, what do you think are the first and what are the steps that you would take, or do you have a plan? Should this money come through, how would you envision using it?
Thank you for that question. Well, we're just first learning about this recently, so we don't yet have a plan, but we definitely are quite used to having to act quickly and efficiently. We've only learned to do that more so in the last year. So I think our first plan would probably be to work initially with AOE and then our other agency partners about really where are the gaps and what are the needs. But I imagine that we would work most closely with one of our communications partners. We've done a lot of work around, particularly right now, we've done a lot of messaging around perinatal depression. And so we have a sort of a roadmap for how to do that work. We have a vendor who's worked with our partners and our stakeholders to develop that messaging and get it out to the field in a way that is well understood and meets the needs of families and has been tested. And so I imagine that we would probably go that route. There's been DMH and health department and AOE have spent a lot of time thinking about this. So I think we have a pretty good foundation of what the needs are. I know the pediatricians and the child health providers are very interested in this topic. They are definitely seeing this in their patients, and they have a lot of feelings and opinions about it, and would really like to see this advanced. We have a pretty solid network and way to reach them through our partners at the Vermont Child Health Improvement Program, who talk 3 times a week with the pediatrician. So I am certainly we would capitalize on that and hear what they're hearing on the ground as a way to advance that messaging.
I'm actually meeting with them on Monday, so I'm going to be picking up where you just left off. Don't worry. Now, this is an issue that is critically important, and that is the integration of children's health into the school setting. And I know the pediatricians that I've been talking with are very excited about it. But from your perspective, that's a heavier lift. That's a different direction. Right now, we're looking at collaboration with the AOE, but reaching out in another direction isn't a bad idea. Right now, the health link at schools, it's a school nurse, and the school nurses are under the Department of Health. Would you see a role for them in identifying and supporting or providing information for kids and being maybe the communication link between community and school?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that. The school nurses really are the cornerstone of this work in COVID. And one of the upsides of the response is really to elevate the importance of the role of the school nurse in the health and well-being of the student population. I know you all know that, but not everybody did. And really the relationship that the school nurse holds both with the family and with the child's healthcare provider. And we have an exceptionally strong, we've always had a very strong relationship with the school nurses across the state, but that has only grown in the COVID response. We, as you may know, we work directly with them. Our staff are on the phone with nurses and COVID coordinators all day, every day. So we know them on a first name basis. We have a exceptionally strong new school nurse consultant that works with that group. And so I think we would certainly capitalize on those relationships, both in defining what the problem is, what the needs are, and then also using them as the platform in which to communicate with families and communities about this topic.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And because when I've talked with folks in different schools and brought up the issue of a need for counseling and support, a lot of our counselors see themselves more as academic counselors and not in the role of support services for emotional issues or mental health issues. So having someone as the cornerstone, as you said, who can deal with these really complex issues is neat. And I guess I would really like to see, no, this is not what you want to hear because you're working so hard right now, but I'd really like to see what your thoughts are on how to deploy the funds and to make maximum benefit out of what's there. Because it's great to have a good working relationship with AOE and within the schools, ground floor with nurses, but I can see a need to bring all those people together in a different way and sort out how the money's going to be spent. So,
Yeah.
And by that, I mean how to meet the needs of the kids. Well, I don't know if you can, what your timeline for that, because you've just seen this. This is like a whole new layer of work in your life. And I don't know how that, I guess I'm asking that question on behalf of my chair. I know, how can we help these folks? Because I know how busy you are. We all do.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think we've been really paying attention to this for a long time, and so we have a pretty good handle on what the concerns are. I think we at the health department need to understand a little bit about the AOE's approach to recovery, and I know that they're supporting partnerships at the local level between the designated mental health agencies in order to provide some additional resource and support, which I just have like a little look I know about in a very broad way. So I think we need to understand that for sure. I think we usually start from a public health perspective in that process of understanding what the problem is. I think we're pretty far along pulling in our stakeholders and then really making sure that our messaging is targeted to what those concerns are and what the different populations that need to hear it. So, but I don't think that would take a very long time. I think we would be able to deploy resources and supports pretty quickly because we have a pretty good understanding of what the situation is on the ground.
Thank you.
Senator Hooker, and I'm afraid we only, because I do know we will lose a quorum at 4, understandably, because a quorum of 6, I believe, is 4, and I think we may be losing 3 possibly to go to the conversation about education funding. So let's try to wrap this up in about 5 minutes so we give also Mr. Nichols a few moments.
This is just a point on timing that, Senator Lange, you said it's an immediate issue. It seems to me that it is. We have to look at what's happening in the schools now and in the summer, and summer's not that far away. And I'm hoping that we can implement some of this, so that we can look at these issues during the summer and help these kids who need help.
And just so you know, we, Ms. Dahlberg, this would come out of expedited funds that Senator Kitchell and her committee are working to get out soon. This is not big budget money. These are federal dollars that people have identified should go out soon to address timely issues, and this being one of them. I'm wondering if you could pivot a little bit, and we also mentioned the Department of Health as it relates to making certain that families have nutritious foods throughout the summer, and also partnering with the Agency of Education on that. And for new senators, and also, of course, you and Mr. England are well aware of this, these ideas will go down to appropriations. They also will take testimony and weigh in, on these, and these numbers could become understandably adjusted accordingly. Mr. Englander, I see you've virtually arrived. Do you want to say something about the food in particular?
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I wanted to see that you, since you mentioned my name, I want to see that I was nodding.
Oh, yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I can speak just a bit to it. I think we would definitely look to AOE and take their lead, as they are certainly the architect behind school nutrition services. I think thinking we would want to think really broadly, particularly in the summer, as there are lots of programs that are not in schools and are less sort of in the realm of AOE. I know you heard testimony from Holly Morehouse at Vermont After School, and I know this is extremely important to her. So I think we would certainly continue to work with Holly and with AOE in an effort to make sure that families had access to nutrition services. I think we've worked quite a bit around within the guidance to make sure that students who are working or who are remote have access to those foods, but it's certainly a major priority for the health department, and we would work very closely with AOE, but I would need likely to have more conversation with AOE about how they see our role beyond just supporting the importance of it.
Great. Would you mind doing that? Reaching out to your partners in AOE. We're going to have Secretary French in tomorrow also to weigh in on these 2 points in particular. So if you can work with them, this evening, tomorrow, that would be terrific. It'd be really, really helpful.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Any other final questions or comments before we shift for a few moments with Mr. Nichols? Okay, thank you both very much. Look forward to hearing back from you tomorrow or through Secretary French on both of these items. And I would say what we're going to ask Secretary French is basically the same thing. Is this partnership, does it make sense at this point? And we're also hoping both of you could come down with a little bit of some kind of agreement around what that cost might be. And I know that's a hard thing to actually say, but to get to, but it would be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Nichols, thanks for your patience. We know you too have had a crazy day, but I do appreciate you fitting us in for a little bit. You had reached out to me last night, and along this line of appropriating dollars for literacy, I think we're at this moment where generally, again, we're interested in doing this. We don't know a dollar amount. You mentioned to me that, $500,000 isn't going to get us much. We also heard testimony that, we also don't want to put in so much that it's not going to be used right away. So that's the other piece of it. In other words, if if all of a sudden we could get these dollars on the ground and work with teachers, etc., great, but we also don't want to send something down to appropriations and then for them to hear, we really can't get these dollars out. So part of that will be a conversation with AOE, but you contacted me about the low amount that $500,000 represented. So wondering if you might say a few words.
Yeah, so first of all, I don't know if Jeannie shared my testimony, but it's just quick back of the napkin stuff that I did last night. So if she has shared it or not, I can rewrite it because it's not as accurate as I would like it to be. I just got off the phone with Vermont NEA a few minutes ago while I was waiting to testify. They estimate there's around 2,000 teachers in grades K through 3. I was doing my math based on around 4,000. I forgot to subtract librarians, art teachers, special educators. I was just doing it off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the way I came out with it would be that if you were trying to develop something where there was professional learning for all teachers in grades K through 3, which is where I thought maybe where you folks were going, it would have came out to about $250 a teacher, which doesn't really buy you a lot. So my thought was if you were going to require or ask or provide funds for every teacher to have a high-level graduate course training, perhaps done at their own school or supervisory union or region by some entity that knows what they're doing, similar to what the Williamstown teachers were talking about, then I was thinking that was going to cost a lot more than that. Excuse me. So I came up with the number $5 million because I just simply doubled what I thought you need for 4,000. So if it's half that many, then maybe we're talking 2.5 million. And I really don't have a magical number. I'm just thinking if you want to do it well, it's going to need to be a week's worth of training probably for teachers. And that doesn't touch your teachers that are in grades 4, 5, 6, if you're trying to address all teachers. And I thought that's where you were trying to go. So that's where my thoughts came from.
Yeah, I think a couple things. First of all, thank you for that. Very helpful. We were looking at one point that, if we could make a $2,000 investment in each teacher, given the cost out there of whether it's Stern or other programs or institutes of higher ed, that would be, that'd be a pretty big investment and an important one. But again, these would be, go through the Agency of Education. And I think in some ways we would just continue to take testimony on how we would direct them. Or we would allow, again, the Agency of Education to actually, make these decisions around, where and what teachers, might get and what districts might get the attention.
Yeah, and I have no problem with that. When I first saw the memo or the draft memo, I was worried that you were sending that to appropriations thinking that there's all the money we really need for professional learning, and I didn't want you guys to step into that quagmire. That was my only worry.
No, I appreciate that. And we're still, like I said, this will go down the hall. They'll also take testimony. And I think we'll have a conversation tomorrow with Joint Fiscal a little bit just to get a better sense of whether or not we're nearing into, the numbers that we can ask for. And I think that'll also help us at this point. So.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Any questions for Mr. Nichols at this point? Jay, thanks for joining us.
Of course, anytime.
Really appreciate it.
All right. Be well, folks.
Thanks, you too. So knowing that a few of you are going to be heading out, questions, comments?
I do have questions for Jay about that universal year calendar, but that's for another day, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Just as we relate to this number, right? What we're dealing with right now, Senator Lyons. Where'd you go? There
I
you
can lower my hand. Sorry. Yeah. So as the more we talk about this, the more I can see this as the initial bridge to helping kids.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that based on a lot of the work that we've been doing, and I've been doing in particular in the healthcare environment, we have an opportunity in the long run to build something that is significantly different from what we have today. And I include in that some healthcare and some mental health and other support services that would not be, it would be an education role. It wouldn't be paid for out of our education fund, but we need to have something new and different, and that links. One of the goals of our healthcare reform is to link community services with acute care needs and with with our education institutions. So I see this as a real start. And if we can put some things in place that bring people together who haven't been together, and maybe set up a system that doesn't have a whole lot of holes in it, and by that I mean is resourced adequately, maybe we'll build on something. So
Yeah.
it's good. I think what's happening is great. I really do. My concern is that we don't throw babies out with bathwaters.
Right.
Or that we don't start something that we can't finish.
Exactly. You know it. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be leaving.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Senator Perschlick, what are you thinking about our letter to approve? What are you thinking about the literacy piece?
You mean the dollar amount or just
Just generally that we're focused on trying to take some steps around literacy, and that we would make this one-time investment, not only to train teachers, and then also work with the agency to sustain something, to get something that would continue.
Well, I'm in between what I think I would call what we heard from the superintendent witnesses and then the witness that we heard today, where what I heard from the superintendents was they liked a simple program where we just said, there's a grant, we're going to trust you that you know what's going on in your district and what's best for you.
Right.
We're not going to try to micromanage you. And then what the witnesses today said, well, yes, but you might want to put some parameters around that about at least, if there's going to be more application than there is money, we do want it to go to those districts that are thinking holistically and have the context to other programs that they're working on, that we don't want it to just go to districts like, hey, here's some free money, let's send some teachers off to a program, but it's not connected to their long range plan. So if we can ask AOE to do that, I think that would be good. And I think we don't have to be too specific. AOE would be able to understand what we meant. And I would assume they would agree with the testimony today that makes sense.
Yeah, that's helpful.
I thought the testimony today was good from the Williamstown folks, but also from Colchester, literacy person and the UVM professor.
Yeah, it was the one thing that was so somewhat startling. Well, no, when the teacher said that they left their education experience, and of course, none of us asked where that was, and which is, I think, was the right thing to do, but and didn't feel like they could teach kids how to read, and they were being trained as elementary school teachers.
Yeah,
that's a problem. But I'm impressed by what Williamstown has done around sending teachers to Stern, getting them trained, and then I was so impressed by the teachers recognizing and being interested in kind of continuing, their learning by training other teachers. And so I thought that was great.
And that's what I like about the approach, is that really worked well for Williamstown, but it might not work for somewhere else. So what I heard from others have said, don't force everybody to go to Stearns, because for some
completely.
That's not going to work. So, but we are allowing them to figure that out on their own and decide what's best.
Yeah, I agree.